Hey everyone, it's Michael. Today I'm going to be talking about another R.L. Stine Goosebumps book. This one is called More Tales to Give You Goosebumps. It's also a special edition number 2, which is kind of dumb because these were only released as a special edition type thing. I like this cover with the campfire stuff. I noticed this and I was like, oh, maybe this will kind of fit in with my summertime book review, reads, whatever you want to call it here on the channel. So yeah, here's this. The third book in the series also has Curly, which, by the way, this is Curly in the middle here. I know the last book had him kind of like in a ghostly floating area, kind of like in this hardcover that also includes this book as the second book in this 3-book collection for the Tales to Give You Goosebumps series. Out of the 6 books, there's only this one hardcover with the first 3. Like I said, this is included. This is the original picture of Curly right here, the first time he was ever designed and put on a book, which is kind of interesting. He's very ghostly, very creepy. This book cover used to scare me a lot when I was a child. And then here, of course, you can see him as a camp counselor with a buzz cut, like a military buzz cut. Very interesting. I like the cover. It's pretty cool. Anyway, more tales to give you goosebumps. I wanted to kind of cover a few of these before we start getting into the... by the time we get into September this year, I think that's when I'm probably going to start reading some of the Halloween books from Goosebumps and doing reviews and stuff here on the channel. Because I mainly want to get that done. I want to get all of those out of the way. Maybe in the future I can review some other Halloween book series that are kind of like Goosebumps. I don't know. But more tales to give you goosebumps. I'm very interested to see what other people think about this book. I don't think it comes near as great to the quality of the first book. I really do. It's not as impressive, almost at all. There are a few stories in here that genuinely are fantastic. Really cool stories, really enjoyable. And then there's a lot of them that are just really not that good. Just really meandering. Really just kind of a fill-in-the-check type of attitude, if you will. The first story in here, of course there's 10 stories per each of these Tales to Give You Goosebumps books. The first story is The Werewolf's First Night, which is basically a kid that suspects people might be werewolves. It was not very good. I was very bored with that story. The next story I actually dug quite a bit. It wasn't amazing or anything, but it was pretty decent. P.S. Don't Write Back. Now, basically, this kid is at camp, and he starts getting letters. He doesn't really hear anything from his parents, but he finally gets a letter, and at the end of the letter, his parents write, P.S. Don't Write Back. And he gets a bunch of letters that are kind of like this, and he's kind of like, what's the deal with that? So he kind of wonders if maybe the lake house camping group across the lake, that's a different campgrounds, he almost wonders if they're getting his mail. Maybe there's another kid over there named the same name as himself, so that maybe they're just getting their mail switched up. Maybe the mailman's making a mistake, something like that. So he gets in a boat and goes over there. It's a very weird place. I like the twist at the end of the story. I thought it was pretty cool. I won't spoil that for you, of course. The third story is fun. It's not great. I actually like P.S. Don't Write Back better than this story. This particular story is called Something Fishy. Essentially, a kid, like, after his mom got a divorce, a kid and his, like, little sister, I think is what it was, are just kind of hanging out in their apartment or whatever, and it's very hot. They don't have any air conditioning. Very interesting story. You don't see this kind of story told very often with Goosebumps. R.L. Stine doesn't like to write about divorce because he finds it a little too close to reality, he said. And I agree with him. That shouldn't be a place in kids' media, because divorce is not a good thing. It's just not. It affects kids a lot more than people realize. I think in some cases it affects the children more than it does the parents that get a divorce within their marriage. But this story was very interesting because the kid finds out that he can actually have this little tiny ability that if he circles his finger in the water a certain way, that he can end up inside of the fish tank that he loves, because he has a bunch of pet fish, and it actually becomes a giant terror, you know, to kind of panic over. And it's a fun story. Like I said, it's enjoyable. I really dug it. It has a cool ending, too. I thought it was a pretty neat ending. Kind of a cool third act in general. Like I said, these stories are like 10 pages to 12 or 15 pages at most each, so they're kind of interesting. The pacing and whatnot. You Gotta Believe Me is the next story that we're going to talk about. That's basically just an alien-type invasion story that, oh, I prevented the aliens, you gotta believe me. That's literally what the title's talking about. It wasn't that great. It was kind of I wasn't very into it. Just didn't hold my attention. Again, there's a lot of stories in here like that. This is not the greatest Goosebumps book I've ever read, nor is it even close to being the best Goosebumps book I've ever read in my life. The next story is another rough one. It's called Suckers. It's basically a weird Monster Blood story, but not. At the same time, it's not even close to being called Monster Blood or anything like that. It's just the creatures, the critters, whatever you like to call these things, are basically a lot like Monster Blood. Yeah, kids encounter that. The things like suck onto your skin and won't let go. Really not a good story. About as good as the first Monster Blood book, honestly. It's not very good. Let's move along, though. This one in particular, I think, might possibly be my favorite story in the book because of the kind of love letter attitude that it has. It's called Dr. Horror's House of Video. It's basically a kid who's obsessed with horror movies, and he loves a lot of classic stuff too, like Frankenstein, The Mummy, Dracula, stuff like that. He meets this man who owns a horror videotape shop. And of course, this is the 90s, so it was videotapes, not DVDs. Very interesting thing. But he goes in there and he finds all these horror videos and stuff he wants to watch. He actually sees one in particular that is up on the TV screen that plays in the corner of the room. And it actually is just, again, a really big love letter to movie fans, to Hollywood, especially old Hollywood, because Goosebumps has always kind of had references to old black and white 50s and 60s horror movies like Night of the Living Dummies, based off Night of the Living Dead, title-wise, not the story itself, but the title themselves. The Blob That Ate Everything is kind of a reference to just the old movie called The Blob. Yeah, things like that. You know, Say Cheese and Die sounds like a very much a 50s and 60s type black and white horror movie title. You know, it's very interesting how Goosebumps references that so much and how great that is and how little amounts of people notice that even. It's really interesting to me why nobody talks about that in the Goosebumps community. But yeah, I really love this kind of love letter attitude. Again, this just has, as a big Universal Monsters fan, this really just rung true with me. It was such a good story. I love the ending. I think it's a really cool, just the way it's told. I don't know, it's just very different from a lot of Goosebumps stories. And kind of creepy, honestly, in a weird way. It also has like a Creature from the Black Lagoon type thing in there, too. That was pretty cool. The next story I dug a lot, too. It was pretty good. The Cat's Tale. Basically, there's a storm coming through, and a kid has his window open, basically, and a cat climbs up the tree and jumps into his room. And the cat is real weird. Kind of that Pet Cemetery way, you know? Like, the cat just... It seems nice, it seems friendly, it seems like it wants you to stick around and be company with it and take care of it and stuff and kind of help it to get used to its surroundings. And then it goes weird and starts acting a little odd. And I really dug it. I thought it was a really cool type of story. I just really enjoyed this. I don't know what it was about A Cat's Tale. It's just a really engaging story. It's one of the more memorable Goosebumps short stories or stories in general that I've read in my life. I dig it a lot. I'd recommend the whole book just for those two stories, Dr. Horror's House of Video and The Cat's Tale. The next story was really unnerving. I mean, this may very well be my second or third favorite in the entire book, but it's really good. Shell Shocker. Shell Shocker is genuinely scary. I mean, it's a scary story. The ending is a little goofy. The ending is very much on the Stephen King side. You know how people complain all the time about Stephen King? If you're a fan of him, you probably have heard of this before. But a lot of people talk about how his endings are terrible. This is a very weird ending, and yet I love it. I think it fits so well with the rest of the story. Basically, a girl is messing around on a beach near her, but kind of near her parents, but kind of away. Her dad's asleep, her mom's reading a book or whatever, and she picks up a seashell, and the seashell starts talking to her in this weird kind of high-pitched voice, and it keeps telling her to go over to this cave, right, like away from her family and away from the beach where all the people are, and just kind of go into the cave that if she goes in there, it'll show her the biggest seashell she's ever seen, and she'll become rich and famous because of this. And she's fascinated by this, and she starts to kind of hesitate about going into the cavern, right? And the show keeps kind of talking her into this, about going ahead and going in there. I'm telling you, 10 or 12 or 15 pages long, that story is terrifying. It is so eerie, it gets under your skin. I don't know what it is about Shell Shocker. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Shell Shocker. That just really, it'll stick with you. It's just the way it's told. It's just such a well-written story. It's so eerie, you know? I just love that about it. Poison Ivy is another letdown of a story. I thought it'd be good. It's actually advertised on the back blurb of the book itself. Basically, mean plants. Basically, plants are trying to hurt people, and the solution I just think is stupid. Honestly, I don't like it. Very dumb story. And it's one of those, like, not interesting dumb stories from Goosebumps. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you can have just silly, fun humor with Goosebumps and just silliness and cheesiness, and it works. Poison Ivy does not work for me. I don't like that story. I don't know what it is about it. It's definitely not the worst. I still think the worst is probably The worst could very easily be Suckers, but it also might be The Werewolf's First Night, because The Werewolf's First Night let me down pretty well. The last story in the book, the 10th story, is called The Spirit of the Harvest Moon, which is very interesting. It has this Shining feel to it. If you've ever read Stephen King's The Shining, or you've seen like the Jack Nicholson film or the 90s made-for-TV film, it has this really eerie feeling to it in that story of a family who go up to a lodge, who basically get the whole lodge to themselves. And there's just this atmosphere to the story, and there's kind of like this haunting thing, like the main character's kind of hearing whispers and stuff, and it's kind of creepy. I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty decent. It was a good story to end the finale of this book on, the closing out. It's only about 130 pages too, because Goosebumps books are very short. The tales for Goosebumps stories are pretty kind of short, basically. But overall, I think More Tales to Give You Goosebumps is definitely nowhere as close to being as good as the first book was. It's just fine. It's about as decent as you can possibly get, just okay, you know. A very 50-50 book. Because like I said, about half of it I didn't like, and the other half I loved. I genuinely, a lot of aspects, just loved it. A couple of really good, memorable stories in here, so I'd recommend picking it up if you're a Goosebumps fan, you want some really good horror for some of those stories that I named. But the other ones that I talked about, they're not for you. They're not going to be good. Yeah, not very good. But anyway, More Tales to Give You Goosebumps by R.L. Stine. What are your thoughts on it, folks? If I had to rate this book on a 5-star basis, I'd probably give this maybe a 3 out of 5. Very 50-50, like I said. It's kind of a low 3 out of 5, honestly. But the good parts, the really good stories, the great stories even, they're great. They're worth the money you paid for those. The other ones, not so much. You should have had a discount. It says this was originally $3.99 here in the U.S., $4.99 in Canada. You should have gotten a discount, frankly. But anyway, that's irrelevant. What are your guys' thoughts on More Tales to Give You Goosebumps? Put your thoughts in comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and may the Lord Jesus Christ bless you guys today. And goodbye.